But either way, I think Sabrina Carpenter comes out looking pretty good for wanting to do something interesting and not not a run of the mill music video. And I think originally the church kind of comes out of this looking good for wanting once again to engage with society where it's at instead of wanting to insist that society meet our standards. I'm Scott.
And Mark.
And this is Church is Lame, the podcast where we talk about the silly things that church leaders do that make the church look silly.
So, Scott, I've got to ask you, I mean, before we even start anything, like, when I say, like, I'm Mark and I point at myself, like, do I sound angry that I'm Mark? Or
not angry enough.
Or is it just in my head?
No, not angry enough. Not nearly angry enough. I want to feel the venom. I want to hear the venom.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm not mad about me, like, at least not today.
We have a whole smorgasbord of stories to come out here, including the rare instance where we might actually agree with somebody.
That's horrifying. It's not Greg Locke, is it? No,
thankfully not. Okay. But why don't we start off in our rage mode, and then we'll go to our touchy-feely side, okay?
All right, I'm going to touchy-feely my side when that time comes.
There we go. So
make for a weird video feed.
I'm going to put this first story under the heading of, you may think you're fighting the good fight, but you might actually be fighting the wrong fight. So in California, we have a girls volleyball team that cites biblical truth in forfeiting a match against a trans player, right? So two volleyball teams go up against each other. One of them is from a faith-based school, and they give up their season by forfeiting the game because they refuse to play against a team that has a trans person on it.
So, like, what fresh hell?
Yeah, so like when Jesus said, like, suffer ye the little children, what he meant was, like, except for the trans ones.
It's like, don't play volleyball against trans people because clearly they're superior to you and you'll lose.
Yeah.
You know, volleyball being classically a sport reliant on strength.
Yeah. Like, I understand everybody has a perspective. Everybody has an opinion. Everybody has a faith system. Everybody has their way of interacting with the world. But that's the key, is the church is uniquely charged with the job of interacting with the world. You cannot reconcile the people to Christ if you refuse to deal with them. Like, the two cannot happen together. Like, if you refuse to deal with people, you are just living in your vacuum, and nothing gets done for the sake of the kingdom, which is actually the opposite of what Jesus is trying to get us to do.
Yeah, like, what are you trying to accomplish by forfeiting the game?
Like, they're trying to be right, right? That's really at the end of the day. They're trying to be right.
Yeah, it's like you get to sit there and go, oh, well, we took the L because we're so spiritual. It's like, well, if you're that spiritual, then you would have loved that person enough to play against them.
Exactly right. You would not only would you have played against them, but you would have broken bread with them. You would have made sure to be the first person to shake their hand. You know, maybe you don't say things like, oh, I respect you, or I respect what you're doing, but you just say something like, you know, I'm happy to be here with you, you know?
Yeah, like when Jesus said, like, love your enemy, he wasn't screwing around. He didn't say love your enemy unless. He said love your enemy, full stop.
Right.
I don't know how many times I'm going to have to say that.
Right. He broke bread with the tax collectors. He broke bread with the prostitutes. You don't hold them at arm's length. You invite them to the table. That's the whole picture. That's the whole picture. Okay, moving on. So don't be that person. Don't be that person. Okay, this is maybe my favorite story of the week, Mark. Just because we get to, like you know, we talk about, like, fake celebrities, Christian celebrities. This story actually involves a real celebrity, Sabrina Carpenter, Song of the Summer. She did like many celebrities did, and she filmed one of her music videos in a church. And, you know, it's a win-win. You know, the church gets to make a little bit of money. They're not necessarily endorsing the musician or their music. They're just making a little bit of money off of a music video that's going to be made anyway, right? And so the church and the denomination, you know, had an issue with this, and what is this? The priest obviously was not popular inside the church, so the church body just kind of fired him under the blanket of he's not stewarding money well.
So, like, the priest paid this person to film there?
Well, Sabrina Carpenter and her organization and the record company paid the church to use their facility to make the music video.
So, yeah, I'm not sure how his stewardship is bad then.
Right, like he actually made the church money.
Yeah, and I mean, admittedly, when I think about, if a band came and said, "Oh, we want to, record, a music video in your church," not that, my church is very film worthy.
Yeah.
I mean, like, there'd be some some discussion about that. I'm not sure that we could go along with it if it, whether or not it was a Christian artist. I don't think would matter. It'd just be kind of like this is not really the space is for. But I mean,
yeah.
Like, I don't see, like, if you come to that conclusion for your church, like, I have no, like, way to, like, say, well, that was a mistake.
Yeah, it's really interesting because you don't know the whole history of the church, right? So you don't know, like, well, it's New York, so maybe they have a long history of renting it out for, weddings and receptions and bar mitzvahs and, jazz concerts. And maybe this was just kind of like one of those, maybe not. Like, maybe this was like a unique situation. Hard to tell. But either way, I think Sabrina Carpenter comes out looking pretty good for wanting to do something interesting and not a run-of-the-mill music video. And I think originally the church kind of comes out of this looking good for wanting, once again, to engage with society where it's at, instead of wanting to insist that society meet our standards. But then, like, if they would have had a clear policy, no music videos here, they never would have got into it, and there never would have been a story. But it's the turnaround that got them in trouble, right? Maybe we want to do this, but really we don't. It's like, like, figure out what you're about before you start doing extracurricular activities.
Yeah, I find this kind of exasperating, just because, it's saying, like, okay, well, you've done bad at your job. This like this one thing, I feel like it should not have been like that. Like a significant enough event. Like, maybe it was a straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah.
But I mean, as an opportunity to show, I'm not sure, I'm like, hospitality is not quite the word, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm sure, it's like, hey, it's like, any ways we can get people around us to be able to preach the gospel in some meaningful way is good.
Yeah.
It's like, if they use this opportunity to, to preach the gospel in some way to Sabrina Carpenter, then that's good. And for a church to be like, well, no, like, they could be like, oh, that didn't work out the way we wanted it to, so let's not do that again.
Yeah.
But it's all about preaching the gospel. So it's like just to penalize your pastor for that is just kind of shows me, like, your priorities are wrong.
Yeah. All right, let's move on, because the next story is even more fun. Maybe and arguably even a bigger celebrity.
Okay.
So Denzel Washington is one of the stars of the new movie Gladiator II. Why you need to make a sequel of Gladiator is beyond me. Like, it was a perfect ending. There was no need to continue the story. But, in the world of always needing a new movie to make more money, they greenlit Gladiator II. And Mark, I kid you not, other than election news, this story was the most often reported story in my Christian news feed. Denzel Washington revealed that he kissed another man in the filming of this film. It got cut from the film, but there was actually him kissing somebody else. And
okay,
my question is why is this even a story in the Christian media? Why does Christian media even give a rip about this?
I couldn't, okay, I say I can't say that I can't even begin to imagine, but I can imagine, and that's because the church tends to be so ridiculously homophobic.
Yeah.
That just two guys kissing is just somehow like deeply offensive. It's
Yeah.
like I'm sure half these people that are mad about this have watched The Godfather and don't care.
Yeah.
I mean, there are numerous cultural uses of kissing between friends, between lovers, etc.
Yeah.
I'm fairly certain that it would have made sense within the context of the story.
Yeah, that's what I'm about to say. Like, I think the tension here is that Denzel Washington would say he's a man of faith, right?
Mm-hmm.
That he's a man who believes in God. But he's also an actor. And as an actor, he is as one of the finest actors in the world, several Oscar awards, all that jazz.
Mm-hmm.
He's dedicated to telling an accurate story. Words is hard.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to tell a story about the era of the gladiators and the immorality and the craziness of the times, then this is part and parcel of the story.
Right.
That all sorts of what we would now call ungodly relationships occurred, in deference to the leadership of the time and the culture of the time. And so did Christians just think that Christian actors can only do parts that subscribe to a Christian ethos? Is that where we're at?
I'd like to say no,
Yeah,
but it kind of seems like that's the case.
Yeah.
It
doesn't help that our friend Candace Cameron, whatever her name is, would take that ethic. Like, she would say happily, like, yeah, I created a whole TV network based off the idea that there should be God-friendly programming, and our favorite guy, Kirk Cameron, So now the loonies are running the asylum.
Well, I mean, I was thinking about Kirk Cameron when you were talking about that, just because Kirk Cameron will, if he ever has an on-screen kiss, it must be with his wife,
right,
and not somebody else, because like he feels that acting like shouldn't cross certain bounds,
right,
and if that's what he wants to do, I'm fine with that. But acting as a thing, it doesn't mean you are the person that you're portraying.
Yeah.
Either that or like Tom Hanks would have died a long time ago when he filmed Philadelphia, but that didn't happen,
Yeah.
And I think, for believers of faith to just refuse to portray anything, like you better have a fine reason for it. I mean, maybe Kirk Cameron has issues with lusting after other women, so he does not want to kiss another woman when he's acting.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's the case, but maybe if that's a reason, like that's a good reason. But just because it's tangentially gay, if you do the math in a very weird sideways manner, like no.
And it's nothing that highbrow. It just plays well with the only audience that he has left, is really what it comes down to, right? All right, moving on. Now, to the part where like we might actually agree with some of the stories this week. Not fully. There's definitely a story that I don't agree with, but we have two stories that we might actually agree with. So let's start with the first one. That the nominee for the Attorney General, Matt Gaetz, his nomination draws pushback from Christian conservative groups.
That's
yes, please.
Kind of miraculous.
Yep.
I mean, I want to put this in the most Christian way possible. The crimes of which he is alleged to have committed, are significant to the point where,
yeah. And like, I don't know about you, but I don't think these Christian conservative groups are really mad that he did it. I think because of the kind of groups they are, right? Like, if you're a group that is against the trafficking of young girls, you kind of have to be against it. If you're a group that's against the sexualization of children, then you kind of have to be. So I think they were kind of backed into a corner, and if they could, they would not take a stance on it. But since they have to, like, it was the only stand they could take, and I think that's kind of spineless.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the worst part is that I'm sure that there's plenty of other individuals out there, just in the world broadly of politics, right, that they should be taking issue with, that they're not, that they're turning a blind eye to, because that ultimately that individual is going to support their aims and goals.
Yeah.
And that frustrates me.
Yeah, you think about all the different nominees through history who have not gotten confirmed for far less than human trafficking and allegedly giving drugs to underage minors to have sex. Like,
Mm-hmm.
the level of hypocrisy that we've gone to is just mind spinning. And not that I want to get into politics, 'cause I don't want to get into politics, but there used to be a time in the church where there was utter clarity, right? There's clarity that morals and standards and spirituality in a person's personal life mattered. And that doesn't seem to be the case. And that's an indictment of the church, not an indictment of politics.
Yeah, and that was in the 90s. And I don't mean the 1990s. I mean the 90s.
Right.
No ditches in the front of it.
Right. All right, moving on to one of my favorite guys to pick on, John Piper. The ultra reformer who believes that there's only one proper way to interpret scripture. And by the way, speaking of Tom Hanks that you referenced earlier, if anybody ever tells you there's only one correct way to interpret scripture, do what Jenny says. Run, Forrest, run. Okay? All right. But anyway, John Piper was asked a question about should churches require tithing? Should that be a requirement, right? And he basically took a stand that was very common sense. He's like, look, thousands of years ago, the ministry was set up in such a way that that's how it was designed. Like, this man's job was to do all the spiritual leadership. And in return for that function, you made sure he was taken care of, that he had food, that he had shelter, that he had, proper clothing to keep him through the cold and the wet, and that was the design of the system. And because that's no longer the design of the system, tithing as a requirement no longer makes sense. And I think that's a pretty common sense way to look at it. I'm
worried about that, though.
Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, just to say that we need to require tithing, I think is an absurdity. We should never tell people that they are they are morally required to, or we will kick you out of this church if you don't tithe. But the other side of it is that to say that that the model of worshipers supporting their church is no longer relevant. Seems weird, because where else is the church's money coming from? And if it's not the church, it's going to have to be by the church running businesses, and then we kind of get to Jesus flipping the tables over.
Right. I hear that. I think I didn't read the whole thing. My guess would be that in America, especially, we are moving more and more to part-time church leadership.
True.
Right.
Yeah.
But my big problem with this, and not a big problem, but he kind of left out the fact that at almost every church in America, when you become a member, you sign a membership agreement. And part of that membership agreement is that you commit to tithing. Right? And so on the one hand, he's saying, well, you shouldn't require it. On the other hand, he's kind of saying, but if you want to become a member, I'm not forcing you to become a member, but if you want to take the next step in community, which everybody wants to belong to something. So I think it's a little bit disingenuous the way he answered it, because he knows that on the other side that there's a pseudo requirement to it.
Yeah, and there's a lot about John Piper and what he asserts that is just it's frustrating to me. And in many cases, I would say, dude, you are straight up wrong about this. But I mean, there are realities that the modern church is going through, at least in the United States. It's every congregation pretty much is shrinking, or if one is growing, it's because another is shrinking.
Right. Exactly.
And there are realities where I don't remember if we talked about this before, but I did read, I think it was in Christianity Today, And it was talking about, like do churches even need buildings anymore?
Yeah.
Like just because of all those changes. And it was really interesting to think about that. Like whereas, like my church is trying to find more and more ways we can make better and better use of our facilities. Um, I'm sure like there's a good place I think for house churches.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, let's keep moving on. Okay. So, in terms of talking about churches kind of reorganizing because people are leaving, coming and going, the Presbyterian Church of the USA, PCUSA, has cut 12 national staff members as an effort to reconfigure their offices due to declines in memberships and donations. So, like we've seen everywhere else, Southern Baptists, United Methodists, like you just said, the church is generally speaking on a decline path in America, and this is no different.
Yeah, I really wish it wasn't the case, for any of a number of reasons. Just because it's sad. I mean, it shows that. Pardon me. It shows that we as the church are not really doing a good job of preaching the gospel.
Yeah.
And like to an extent, I feel kind of like personally at fault for this, even though I'm a creepy introvert.
Yeah.
And I don't have any like of the skills necessary to be involved in, I don't want to say sales, but like it's that same kind of like personality. Like you have to be able to talk to people that way.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of baggage that comes along with the phrase preaching the gospel. I would say more to the point that modern churches are failing at a higher and higher level to be an integral part of the community, the larger community.
Yeah.
Right. There used to be a time in this nation, in your towns, where like, okay, there's a town square, right, and there was like a town courthouse, and there was a church, and that was the epicenter of your community.
Yeah.
And as populations have gotten bigger, as urban sprawl happens, yes, churches, like we're building satellite churches and we're building more buildings, but then the people of the buildings are coming to the buildings and the church is not actually part of the community. And that's a problem.
Yeah, I know a lot of people have argued about, churches shouldn't be streaming services for, reasons like that. But I mean, I think when it comes to preaching gospel, I mean, the way I would interpret it is that we preach in word and deed. Because if people know who you are and where you're coming from, and what you believe in, and you are really just loving on the people, the community, and like there's that, they can see the light of Christ in you. Like to me, like that is a way of preaching the gospel.
Exactly.
You don't have to be, like a used car salesman about it. But I mean, how many times have we talked or, just cried because churches just, like they're not preaching the gospel even in deed anymore.
Yeah. Let me give you a real world example of how this has failed. Emmanuel Church in Franklin down here. So I live south of Indianapolis, for those of you who don't know, and there is there's real poverty down here. It's not just a bunch of hicks living on farmland. There are really homeless people. There is real poverty. There is real hunger. There's real health issues, right, that go along with not being able to afford healthcare, right? And so the local satellite of the mega church in the area, every year they do an annual public service event, right?
Yep.
So much opportunity to be the healing and hopeful hands of Jesus. And what do they pick for their annual service? They help the local district, who has employees to do this, shut down the community pool for the summer. And I don't think there's anything wrong with helping the community shut down the pool. By all means, if you find that valuable, then that's valuable. But the people who are hurting the most are the people who should be the most valuable to the hands and heart of Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, like when you said annual, there's a part of my brain that just went, what about the
rest of the time? Yeah.
Yeah, like
Sure.
51 weeks of the year.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not sure what I want to call it. Like, it's like faux mission or like,
They're
faux love.
they're country club churches. Yeah.
That's a,
It's a sad thing.
it's like, I don't know if that's a nicer or less nice way of saying
Right. Well, hopefully it's less nice. Hopefully that paints the picture, right?
Yeah.
Like you could easily mistake it for your local golf club.
Hmm.
Okay. All right, moving on. Moving on. So then the church that you hope would close, Gateway Church. We've talked about Gateway Church in the past.
No.
Their pastor was forced to resign after he's publicly accused of sexually assaulting teenage girl from when she was 12 years old. So after, like, scandals don't just hurt one person. Scandals hurt the whole church. So
Yeah.
scandal hits the church, the pastor is forced to resign, attendance goes down, tithing goes down, other leaders are forced to resign. The whole structure of leadership and support falls apart, the church falls apart. And yeah, so the deep staff cuts are coming to this church as a result of not holding one man accountable, not knowing who he is and how he lives his life, not living in community, and not forcing that pastor to live in community with the others of his church. It's sad, but it's, in a way, it's necessary and it's good in the case of this church.
I know it's like every time I see one of these stories about this exact thing,
Yeah,
which is, let's face it, every week we look at the headlines.
way too often. Yeah,
Yeah, I get discouraged a lot by it, because I'm like how am I supposed to like reach out to somebody who is like unchurched?
yeah,
Like even somebody like I know well personally, and I have a relationship where I can talk about those things with, when there's so much of this stuff going on inside of the church walls, and it makes me kind of terrified. Like, what if it's happening inside of my church, and like I'm just too blind to see it, or like like it's terrifying to me.
yeah.
Because again, what Jesus says, whatever you do to the least of these, you do for me.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that cuts both ways. Whatever bad thing you do to the least of these, you do to Jesus.
Yeah. I think it's very revealing how churches talk about it, right? So the consistent thing that you might hear from the church is, well, what do you expect us to do? How invasive do you expect us to get? Right? Like,
Mhm.
this is a man in America who has the right to go out alone if he wants to go out alone. What do you expect from us, right? But then on churches that expect accountability, that expect transparency, those are churches that are going to be very direct with you. Look, our
Yeah.
pastor will be part of a home group. Our pastor will not be going out alone at night. He won't be, or he won't be our pastor. For most churches, one of the qualifications of being a pastor is being married, right?
Yeah.
So if your wife doesn't know who you are, where you are, that's a problem, right? So churches that understand the importance of accountability and transparency talk in a very different way than churches that don't. And it's very easy to tell the difference.
Yeah, and I've heard people mock Billy Graham for
Yeah.
not wanting to go anywhere to without his wife. That he always refused to be anywhere alone with another woman. He always had to have his wife with him. But you know what? This didn't happen to Billy Graham.
Right. Yeah, I'm not. Yeah. Yeah, I guess so. That's it. I don't know. I don't. There's a lot of different ways, but yeah, I guess in one sense, like if you hold a high standard for yourself and you hold yourself to that high standard, then bad things tend not to happen. I get that. Okay, let's just leave that there. Okay, let's roll this up with a little bit of persecution watch. We tend to complain about a lot of persecution in America that's quite frankly imaginary, right? Oh, I had to start my own TV network. Hollywood is so God unfriendly. I had to start my own TV network, right? It's like that is not persecution. Oh, when I stand outside of a women's health facility, there are people who stand against me. That is not persecution. That is people using their free speech to maybe be louder than you using your free speech, right? But so let's talk about some real persecution just to make sure that we keep some perspective. Nicaragua, once again, they have expelled the senior bishop, Carlos Herrera. He's the head of the country's Episcopal Conference. So there are really situations in the world where they are trying to silence Christians and they are trying to minimize the influence the Christian church has on a country. Like it's real and it's like not hidden and it's not subtle. They literally just expelled the man, you know? Up next, in Europe, this was one that was interesting, and I don't want to go too far deep into it because I don't really know all the instances, but apparently there were like 2,400 cases of anti-Christian hate crimes in Europe in 2023. 2,400. And so I guess this number is a combination of like individually committed crimes as well as what they consider to be the state committing some sort of discriminatory, words is hard, crime against the church. And finally, a young Christian Pakistani woman reports that the police refused to arrest her abductor and rapist who abducted her and raped her at gunpoint, and they refused to arrest the man. So this is a case where, you know, things in Pakistan may not look all that different than things in America sometimes.
Yeah, it's terrible when anybody gets, you know, assaulted like that. But then to have the authorities just say, "Oh no, we're not going to arrest, you know, the perpetrator because you're a Christian," like that's just so evil to me.
Like in Pakistan, if you're Christian, you're a less than human. Where in America, if you're Christian, you are the privileged few. Like you are the most powerful voting bloc in America.
Yep.
You know, so for all of you who claim persecution here in America, like before you go there, please think about whether or not you're really experiencing persecution.
Yeah, like search like Christian killed Nigeria and then get back to us.
Yes, please. All right, so that's our show for this week. We take very seriously what we do every week, telling stories of the idiocy in church leadership that makes all Christians look like idiots. This show exists to document that so that when church leaders ask the question, why don't people take church seriously? Here's your answer. So by all means, if you got something to say, we welcome it. Send us a review. If you're listening to the podcast, give us a rating. If you're watching on YouTube, you know, shoot us a comment. I'm very good about reading those comments and getting back to you. If your comment is pretty snarky, you can expect me to be snarky back. If you ask a question or leave a comment in good faith, I will leave a comment back in good faith. If you really want to say something in long form, churcheslane.podcast@gmail.com. And Mark is gonna, you know, give it a good reading and give it the consideration and response that is appropriate. We want to hear from you, and we're part of this conversation in order to elevate the church. The rising waters lift all boats, and by lifting all boats, we see God's glory done on this earth. And that's my spiel.
And with that, go in peace and serve the Lord. Amen.